Welcome to Blockchain Unpacked. Blockchain Unpacked is a videocast and podcast series held in partnership between RegTech Associates and Crystal Blockchain. Join Jason Boud and Marina Khaustova every month and explore the real-world impact of criminal activity beyond the blockchain. During the series, we will introduce you to a range of experts who will help analyze regulatory effectiveness and share the latest news, trends and predictions in a digestible format to keep you in the know.
Hi, I'm Jason Boud and welcome to the first episode of Blockchain Unpacked. This brand new show will feature expert insights from prominent leaders in the blockchain, regulatory and technology industries. I'm delighted to be co-hosting this show with Marina Khaustova, the CEO of Crystal Blockchain. Each month, the show will begin with a 15-minute chat between Marina and I, focused on what we think are the most interesting developments that have taken place over the last few weeks. And after our discussion, and in this week's show, we'll be joined by Carol Van Cleef, CEO and founder of Luminous Group. We hope this combination of expertise will bring unique insight and perspective to current events in the blockchain and Web3 markets. So Marina, I hope you're excited as I am to be recording the show. Why don't you tell our listeners what you've been up to since we last spoke?
Our team, we are mostly European-based, but we also have our offices in the United States. Our team has come back from the big event that was happening last week in Washington, D.C. It was hosted by Chamber of Digital Commerce, and it's called Blockchain DC Summit. And it's a unique place where you meet the policymakers who are very much concerned, and they care about the space, and they want the blockchain industry and the crypto industry to develop further. But obviously, there are many problems in the legislation space at this moment related to crypto in the United States. First of all, there is a lack of alignment, between the policymakers, and that deeply affects the businesses that are established right now on U.S. soil, or they want to establish their operations there. And while Europe has, already MiCA not in place, but in the final stages before it's being developed and deployed. Now there is a new ML regulation towards DeFi. US is earlier in this legislative process, and they're still aligning, the views and trying to coordinate their actions. And I had a chance to speak to many people from Congress and to many state representatives about their views on that. It seems that there's a long way, ahead of them to actually get to this, common ground and common understanding. So that's actually was very interesting to see that all of them see importance of correct information that they should review and understand and research before they make any action. That's good to see. And they're also concerned, of course, about the businesses who are choosing to operate outside of the United States right now, which leads to regulatory arbitrage, And my opinion is that regulatory arbitrage was a reason why we are having, so many problems right now on the, scam operations and absolutely, malicious activities happening within certain virtual asset service providers. That's because, several years ago, we had a situation where you were choosing the jurisdiction for your business, depending on how tight the regulations there were. And now, it hurts me to see also that, US, with their uncertainty about everything, what's going on with the regulatory scene, experiencing, this situation. Businesses are choosing, to establish operations elsewhere. So everyone's concerned about that as well. In the Senate, in the Congress, I saw that. And it's good to see, that, again, they are researching this. They are putting a lot of attention to this.
Yeah, that's great. That's a really good intro to the show as well, because we're going to be focusing quite a lot with especially with Carol being our guest on quite US related sort of subjects. But I just got one follow-up question, Marina. What was the mood music, from that event? How would you describe the attitude? Was it sort of conservative? Was it can do? How would you summarize the mood of the conversations you were having?
I think it was uneasy because everyone understood that they need to move fast, and there's no opportunity, to coordinate the actions. And I think this, itchiness, because of that, it was an important motive, for this particular event. And I spoke to many of our customers who are having their main headquarters in the United States. Everyone's eager, to preserve this space and to preserve the innovation, staying on U.S. soil, and they really need to have this support from the legislation. So I think it's everyone's ready to move, and I think it's itchiness and uneasiness about that we really have to move. This is the moment when we make this decision.
Sort of cautious optimism, we should say for now.
Yes, but you see how the space is evolving. There is this enforcement fever, that we saw also happening there while I was there. The announcement about Doc One was published, and then the Binance versus CFTC unfolded, and it holds a lot of things back and puts it in pause. Last year I saw many US-based banks, launching new blockchain units and launching a lot of developments towards crypto. Right now, I believe they are much, much more cautious because of all these developments, and understandably enough. So I'm not sure if that could be called an optimism, but definitely there is a lot of caution. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, 100%. Let's move on to talk about some of the things that have happened in the news over the last sort of month or so. And you and I are going to take it in turns here, Marina. So, from your perspective, what are the big sort of news stories from the last month that have interested you?
I'm looking from the perspective of blockchain analytics solution. Our goal is to provide information about the potential risks for our customers. So for us, the biggest news, of course, is the new ML regulation that European Parliament Committee has been voted for. So it's a really huge news because it right now it covers the gap that Mika had in this regulation, and right now DAOs and NFTs and DeFi platforms will be all subject to these ML regulations, and they must comply if they are controlled by, they say, identifiable persons or entities. Again, decentralized platforms right now are included into this regulation. So this is quite a big step, and important thing is that the due diligence threshold, that is set up in this regulation is right now 1,000 euros, or a little bit above $1,000 for the transactions that should be analyzed and monitored. So all the business with the unlicensed entities will be prohibited under this regulation. And definitely, it's a huge step and big development. I think it's still in the process of changes, and I think there's some time when the changes may be applied to that. It's a huge news for a lot of our customers, and this will change the way again they are treating their compliance divisions and how much what efforts do they put into the compliance. Yeah.
I think we could do probably a whole show. I think perhaps one of our future shows might be on interviewing maybe an MLRO from a European-based central exchange, amongst other things, to see how those new laws and regulations are going to impact both centralized but also decentralized businesses. Yeah, I think that's big news. And anything else that's caught your eye?
Well, there are other things, big things, of course. What's happening between CFTC and Binance. That is, of course, a big thing which affects market deeply because, of course, FTX was big, but Binance is, it's non-comparably bigger to the space, and everything that happens to these giant, of course, affects the whole industry very, very deeply. So I think many of the market players, who are deeply invested into this space are observing these quite, They're trying to develop the scenarios of where it should go first. What are the next steps? This causes a lot of turbulence in this space among everyone who's deeply invested into the industry and long-term veteran of crypto space. What about you, Jason? What caught your eye on the last weeks?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, you picked out one of my stories, and that's absolutely fine. You know, in a way,
okay.
no, that's
sorry,
great.
I was scrolling down.
No,
yeah, sorry.
Honestly, that's great. You know what? One of the things about observing this space, I mean, I've got a background in traditional finance and tech, and you know what is happening, what appears to be happening right now is opposing forces pushing and pulling, and quite a lot of chaos, right? And you know, and on top of what's happening in the digital and blockchain and crypto industries, I mean, the traditional financial markets, you know, aren't exactly covering themselves in glory, right? With European banks being raided and a fine for Wells Fargo, right? So, I mean, I think there's a lot of turbulence and a lot of instability. But what I thought I'd do last time we spoke, Marina, on a webinar, we touched on how the media can sometimes focus just on the negative, and I thought I'd try and bring each month when we speak. A little bit of negativity and a little bit of positivity as well. Try and bring a bit of balance. So there's no shortage of news stories to pick up on. As you've already mentioned, Do Kwon's arrest and the Interpol red notice, and then all of the extradition activities relating to that story is really interesting. I think one of the things I picked out was Coinbase and the SEC. So back in March, the SEC issued Coinbase with a Wells notice, so a final notice before enforcement action, and they seem to be taking issue with Coinbase's primary spot exchange business and its staking service and its wallet. And this seems to be part of an ongoing power struggle between the regulators and, you know, the exchanges, and it's becoming really personal, right, with the exchange CEOs. The SEC has warned Coinbase about other products and how they advertise them in the past. And I think they've also I know they fined the rival Kraken for offering a nearly identical crypto staking service. So, I mean, that's a really interesting story. And I think the other thing that caught my eye was recently a law firm, Cooper and Kirk, a Washington DC-based law firm, published a paper about Operation Choke Point 2.0, and just building on that theme of, you know, the regulatory choke points around potentially around the crypto industry. I thought that was really interesting. Cooper and Kirk, unknown to me, if I'm honest, maybe Carol's got some commentary when she joins, but had previously challenged and won Operation Choke Point 1.0 back in 2012 on a different topic, but really interesting. They've issued their paper, and it's really trying to demand that Congress hold federal regulators to account, and amongst other things, force them to be transparent about their denial of or regulation of crypto-related businesses to the financial system, right? So that's one of the choke point areas. So yeah, those two stories in combination were really interesting from a negative point of view. If I flip quickly into a positive viewpoint, couple of interesting things. A really interesting report came out from Developer Report, and this actually claims that there are over 23,000 open source software engineers responsible for the crypto and Web3 $1 trillion market. But as a result of this regulatory turbulence that's happening in the US, there's actually a sort of reduction in the number of developers in the US or claiming to work for US businesses. And the winners has been a bit of a redistribution of those developers in other locations, India and Ukraine being a couple of the top locations. It's self-reported data, so there's a sort of amount of caution in the data. They harvest data out of things like GitHub and in other public sources. But I thought that was a really interesting data point, and you know, it's a good thing, in my opinion, that developers are around the world, and they represent different communities and different different regulatory stances, different political and social and economic stances. So I thought that was a really positive thing. And the final thing for me on a positive note was I heard an interesting interview on CNBC with a guy called Chris Burnisk, former head of ARK's investment crypto department, and he joined the CNBC show The Exchange. And his viewpoint was that, look, the size of this fight going on between many of the larger centralized exchanges and the regulators is really indicative of what's at stake here. Some of the biggest crypto players are squaring up to this fight. And while the bad news continues and enforcement continues in the crypto and Web3 space, there's no shortage of bad news in the traditional sector. And, is this hey, look what's going on over here in crypto, while, there's some pretty negative news in the traditional finance areas. And then finally, the last thing that sort of interests me, I'd be interested to get your view on this, will be that he predicted that Bitcoin is a standout, stock and standout investment amid this emerging financial crisis in traditional markets. And he predicted we could see a push towards 50K and beyond, which is, a bold prediction considering where we are today. So yeah, they're my picks. I don't know if you've got any thoughts on those few things, Marina.
Yeah, definitely. I think, many people in the space, they predict quite bright, days for Bitcoin. While we see many, fiat bridges, most of them technically destroyed in the United States at this moment, this clearly has an effect on the price of the Bitcoin. And speaking about the positive things, we from blockchain analytics space see several interesting other developments, which are clearly quite good. So last month, like during March, there has been super increased attention to a very particular aspect of scam, which is very, very popular around the world, but for some reason, no one has spoken about these before. And it's quite it's quite astonishing numbers, that are being retrieved from innocent people through this kind of scam. Speaking about pigs butchering, that's kind of a scam strategy that involves, multi-stage activities around, involving social engineering, where the victim is actually convinced to invest his money. He becomes, starts trusting, this person who talks to him or communicates to him so much that he agrees, to send their money somewhere. And these associations, and consortiums of malicious actors who are organizing these events, it's astonishing. It's so big. I mean, before this year, it wasn't possible even to, evaluate, how much of the damage is done through these kind of scams. But crypto, again, puts it all on the surface. It makes it all visible. And right now, I think there is a coordinated action between many investigation units and even law enforcement units, and of course, blockchain analytics tools. They actually, put it all onto the surface, educate people that this exists and this is a real thing, and it's really, really dangerous. That you understand, how to avoid that. And I think that's a really good thing, because again, it's not something that evolved with crypto. It just was existing very, very long time ago. Right now, it's just through crypto, it becomes visible and understandable.
Yeah, really good. And I think that's a great segue into the next section of the show before we invite Carol on, right? Because I think what you're describing there is, how much data there is out there, right? And data is useless without analysis and without, meaning derived from that underlying data, right? And so I know you've been incredibly busy lately alongside travel, and in late March, you released a recent report on the fraudulent activities, and you've got so much great insight from the data. There's some really great visuals on your website, by the way. I played around with your graph on different scam data. It's really good to interact with the data and actually give it to the public at large. But tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that. Yeah, that's quite a big work, and many team members from Crystal were involved into that. So basically, we tried to formulate, what do we think will be prevalent in the, crime trends in the upcoming couple of years. So we actually, we tried to change and to describe the typology, of the crime that is developing right now, and what would come, what would be visible, for the city space. So yeah, I think I'll speak a bit about the top predictions that we had, top conclusions, that we had. So first of all, it's interesting to observe, how darknet marketplaces are evolving over time. We have been moving away from the era where there was like an overlord, this Hydra marketplace that was rooted in Russia, and it was taking the majority of the transactions for themselves and was operating across many countries. So this actually has been shut down 2022. And what we see, happening after that, that there are like many alternatives are being, developed and established since then, but it's not that we are again seeing any kind of consolidation between them. And that also because law enforcement and international investigation organizations, they are becoming much more effective and they have much more experience on understanding these kind of activities. So we're going to see much more of these small marketplaces appear, but we expect them to be much more localized, and no big overlord is expected to appear, also covering multiple jurisdictions. Yeah, so I think right now intelligence unions have become much more proactive also in their way of operation. So that's also quite a good thing. Another like big thing that we see is, of course, a lot of development on CBDC side. And one of the concerns that we have is that, of course, the technology that is being used for that, there is a chance, that some of them will be attacked and maybe even successfully attacked. So there was so many successful attacks against smart contracts, and in total, we estimated that there were like around $3 billion lost as a result of these attacks. So technically, CBDCs are expected to work also on some kind of a smart contract or on this kind of technology. So definitely. Government-backed CBDCs will represent extremely, high payoff target for criminals. So that's basically a call to, to the development teams who are working on these to pay extreme attention to the security level. Another big thing, that big trend that was always, important but picked up significantly last year are, of course, sanctions. And sanctioned assets and attention to the sanctioned assets. However, I would say that the current efforts from the regulators to control sanctioned assets in crypto, we see that they are, not sufficient enough to stop the distribution of these assets. And partially what I can see is that, these regulators who were issuing, these regulations, they also understand that the core problem may be not in, the core solution maybe is not to publish the address, or name of the entity that should be sanctioned. The core issue is, to address big exchanges and VASPs who are dealing with the sanctioned entities, and they start, also paying their attention in this space. So I think it's it's a big development. It's also a big trend, and I also it's also interesting for me to see how territories where we see a lot of new businesses working with crypto established in recent days, like Dubai's Virtual Asset Regulatory Authority. What kind of developments or what kind of changes are they going to bring to their legislative framework? Again, jurisdiction arbitrage still is a big thing these days, and everyone needs to pay attention to that. And of course, coordinated action is one solution to that, but another one is increased attention to actually, what is allowed, and how due diligence is being performed towards these new businesses. Yeah, another big trend that we see is that, of course, after everything happening with the towards Dock1 and Tron, all infrastructure that is using Tron will be will have much more scrutiny. And of course, I have seen Tron supporting bridges, to be named as the most as a quite risky, activity that always caused a lot of attention from every compliance officer when they saw any activity associated with them. I think that will be much more important, and that will have much more implications, moving forward. Rounding up to this section, one interesting observation that I would love to share is that overall we see that blockchain analytics tools will be much more challenged, for their credibility and reliability of their data, simply because these tools, they're positioned quite uniquely between private sector and public sector. They're both of these sectors. They're looking at the data provided by blockchain analytics tools, but they're making different types of conclusions out of these data, and it's critically important for blockchain analytics tools not to fall too much, to become a fiduciary for the customers, because this data is also being used by supervisory authorities for bringing decisions that could be beneficial for the industries. So I think we're going to see a lot of these. A lot of this scrutiny also, and a lot of this attention paid to blockchain analytics tools, and I think it's also a good thing because it helps, again, everyone to have access to true data and correct data and correct information. Yeah.
Amazing. There's so much to pick up on there, but actually, one of the things I wanted to ask about was there's so much going on in sanctions, and I was curious a couple of days ago, a while back, Tornado Cash was sanctioned, and that brought up the whole debate of, can you really sanction a piece of technology? And if you sanction a piece of technology, what does that really do, right? And I was in a panel listening about sanctions and touching on crypto, and I thought I'd find out what's happened with Tornado Cash and shut down, etc. But it's now been reborn as another name, right? Another variant of the same cash mixer called something else. So I think this industry we're talking about now brings that unique perspective of and the challenges that you've outlined with CBDCs and the threat of, the underlying sort of cyber and hacking threat against the technology and the smart contracts. I think now would be a really good time to invite Carol onto stage. So let's move on to the next section of the show. And Carol, why don't you come and join us? So welcome, Carol. As an introduction, Carol Van Cleef is the CEO and founder of Luminous Group, a consulting firm focusing on strategic consultancy and compliance advisory for digital assets and blockchain companies. Carol's a practicing lawyer and AML specialist, and I'm going to cut your intro short there, Carol, because you've got such amazing experience that I want to get you talking, right? So any reflections on what, and I'm sure you have, on what Marina and I have just been discussing?
Absolutely. And it's fascinating to listen to your comments. Many things have been going on in Washington, and Marina, I'm glad you had the opportunity last week to be in DC. I was actually in Poland at the time, and getting a different perspective on the world. It's been basically nonstop. It feels like certainly since last November. It's been one thing after another, but really it goes almost back to a year now. When we had Voyager as the first sort of move. We had a series of companies in the crypto lending ecosphere that experienced difficulties and went into bankruptcy. Obviously, with the FTX situation, FTX was sort of the perfect example of something that I talk about all the time, especially in the context of U.S. laws and regulations, that everything's fine until something goes wrong. And when something goes wrong, it often will have an impact on people well beyond the parties that are immediately in the room at the time. So FTX had an issue, yes. Well, that issue spilled over to the banks. It spilled over to other exchanges, other players in the ecosystem. So in the US system in particular, we're pretty darn forgiving. And while people criticize and say, hey, we're going to move out of the US and we need clarity and we need this and we need that, if you think back that we're now, a solid 10 years into the great exploration and almost 15 into Bitcoin generally. I guess it is officially 15 years, that a lot has happened in this time period. Now, partly what's going on right now is that we're experiencing, I think for the first time, sort of that, hopefully I don't offend anyone, but that sort of come to Jesus moment that we're having in the US. I know personally that I got kicked off of, booed off of, and then disinvited to conferences back in 2014 because I got up and I told them, here are some laws and regulations that do apply in the US that you're going to be expected to comply with. And if you don't, there are consequences associated with it. Well, it's taken 8-9 years for those consequences to catch up, but they are catching up. And what we're really doing, what we're going through right now in a lot of ways is a cleansing time, where there was a lot of people who looked in a lot of different directions for a lot of years. And finally, it's gotten to the point that if we're going to move forward with the true potential of this technology, that these issues need to be addressed and we need to get them off the table and not have them hanging out there as they've been hanging out for years. So it's a long way of saying that, one, I'm not surprised at what's going on right now. Two is I think that it is disconcerting. It's definitely disconcerting to a lot of people who are living through whether it's the aftermath or the process that we're going through. But I think at the end of the day, we're going to come out in a much stronger place with much broader general acceptance of the technology and the use of the technology. So that as predicate, I'll try and put some of the events that we've seen in the last few weeks and now months into some perspective. With FTX, the real defining moment, I believe, from the banking perspective was when it was revealed that FTX was using an account set up on behalf of Alameda, an affiliated entity at Silvergate, to bring money into the U.S. And then there was some overlay of potential money laundering that had been happening through FTX. You combine those two elements because the fact that the money was coming in through the wrong kind of account in the U.S. Is a major trigger for a compliance shortcoming, which will immediately heighten that spiny sense of both regulators and law enforcement. And to the extent the law enforcement had not already been looking into, these kinds of issues, the flow of funds and so on, that this accelerates that pace. And we saw very shortly thereafter notification that the DOJ, our Department of Justice, had initiated an investigation into the Silvergate Bank. I'm a long-term, what you didn't mention in my background is that I started as a banking regulatory lawyer. I had been involved in failures in the first, or the savings and loan crisis, which happened back in the late 80s, early 90s, and have been involved in subsequent banking crises, shall we say. So I know how these things progress. I know the general sense. I also know that the bank regulators don't like a bank that's involved in an investigation around money laundering, a criminal investigation. So I had a pretty good sense that the days for Silvergate were definitely limited, and I think in a very natural process, the money started leaving Silvergate. They started downsizing. And they announced back in early March that they were going to undergo an orderly wind down. And a voluntary dissolution, so that really no one was being hurt, including the shareholders would take a hit. But at the end of the day, there might be something left for the shareholders. So, but that then triggered a lot of concern, really accelerated concern around Silicon Valley Bank. And Silicon Valley Bank really was sort of like the cream in the middle of two cookies in a sandwich cookie. Maybe that's the wrong type of analogy to draw, but it really was in between. It was in between two crypto events, because Silvergate was clearly a crypto event, and Signature, the third bank that went down within a matter of about 72 hours, was the other crypto bank. Silicon Valley Bank plays, at least in the US, and then we've certainly seen sort of a contagion internationally, a very specific kind of a role in the startup culture. Some crypto companies were banking at Silicon Valley Bank, but for the most part, that activity was happening either at Silvergate or Signature. But Silicon Valley Bank was so central to the startup culture in the U.S. and beyond, that any problems there set off really a great deal of concern about what was going to happen next, including paychecks out to a lot of very innocent people in this process. So in a lot of ways, we need to separate Silicon Valley Bank from our conversations around the crypto banking issues. And once we get beyond that, and I apologize for sort of a lengthy prelude to it, but it's important to understand that distinction and its implications in the U.S. And because we had those two cookies on either side of the cream in the middle that go at almost the same time, the impact on the crypto space from a banking perspective was incredibly significant. The complaints around Choke Point 2.0, as you mentioned earlier, that's really been going on for several months now. It was certainly heightened by the fact that suddenly now you had a lot of crypto firms totally displaced. But I know personally that I have always counseled my clients, and I was around for Choke Point 1.0, and I was around for the debanking, de-risking that's really been going on for 10 plus years before Choke Point, which is very important to note that really Choke Point 1.0 was it was more concerted public policy effort in the 2012 timeframe, but the actual de-risking has been something that's been going on since 9/11 and the passage of the Patriot Act. So we've been through, I call them pogroms, really, that we've been through multiple pogroms over the years, moving from one industry to another over time. Crypto, in fact, this 2.0 time period, this is probably our third or fourth serious program that we've had over the last 8-9 years. But the critical piece, as I started to say, is that I always advise my clients to have at least 2, if not 3 or 4 or 5 banks. You need those banking relationships because you're never more than really one examination cycle away when the bank regulators come in and examine the bank and they decide, oh, the policies and procedures that bank has in place is not good enough. Now, one of the issues that's really important is that crypto brings to bear a number of new issues, a lot of technical issues that many banking organizations simply haven't been equipped to deal with. So suddenly they're banking companies, providing services to companies where they don't necessarily fully understand the scope of the company's activities. And what that really translates into is what kind of of risk does it put the bank at? And that's where the regulators get concerned. And again, a lot gets, we have a very forgiving system up until the time something happens. And we've had those events that have triggered the regulators now having to look, be more accountable for looking at the activity that is going on. Now, to the regulators' credit, they have, in fact, taken a number of steps over almost 2-year period now, where they have been working hard to tell the banks that they need to look at the risks that they're involved in. So the fact that we're at this 2.0 period, it's interesting that people are calling it 2.0 and have made it a matter of public concern, but the ingredients were all there before. And part of the responsibility, to be very honest, lies with the crypto space. That the crypto space has, for many years, not taken full responsibility for the fact that there are laws and regulations that do apply. And so, as I said, that now we have reached that point where I guess there's an English phrase of the chickens come home to roost, and we've got that happening to a certain extent. As you said, Coinbase, and I'm sort of skipping around a little bit, but there is some progression here, is the Coinbase does have, there are 3 different elements to what that Wells notice covered. And it's not clear what may be the biggest point of focus for the SEC at this point. But we do know that, they certainly have flagged the issue previously of the certain tokens that are being traded across the Coinbase exchange as being securities. As a result of the CFTC action against Kraken on staking, we know that is clearly the SEC's action against Kraken is clearly within the scope of the SEC as well. And then this unhosted wallet, waiting to see how that one plays out fully as it's fleshed out. There's going to be a lot of talk in Congress this year, but there's unlikely to be any legislation. I also have a somewhat cynical view, is that crypto has become a great avenue, a great constituency for fundraising for members of Congress, so that they want to be active in the conversations. But at the same time, and I think in this presentation I did 3 weeks ago, one of the senators who is also on the panel said, if the regulators can take care of it, we would prefer for them to take care of it. So that's the way our system works. And we do have a system of laws and regulations that are in place. And there are a lot of tools that are available to the regulators to handle things the way they need to. So we may see a little bit of action that's crypto related this year, but we're not going to see that major bill that I think people would like to see, sort of building off of the Luminous presentation. I think they're rethinking some of their approach, in fact, and maybe looking at something that will look more like what's happening in the EU now. But I think we're going to see tweaking around the edges, in part because everyone needs to do something to save face around the banking crisis. And I'll close out on the Signature Bank as sort of that other side of the sandwich. That Silvergate or Signature Bank was closed by the U.S. regulators because of systemic risk. The systemic risk, when the dust settled, appeared to be the flight of deposits and the flight of deposits related to stable coins, and in particular, Circle, because Circle had, back on the Thursday evening before the Friday morning takeover of Silicon Valley Bank, had been trying to move $3.3 billion worth of assets out of Silicon Valley Bank. Those were $3.3 billion that are used to back the USDC. And the regulators were concerned that same thing would happen at Signature. So they invoked a special clause in our laws that allow for this. They consider that to be a systemic risk because that would then trigger a greater run on the bank. The bank was not insolvent at the time of closure. Now, what is very important here, and I think it brings us full circle in our conversation around RegTech and the issues that Marina noted, is that about a day later after the closure, the New York Times broke a story that said that Signature Bank had been under investigation by the Department of Justice before the closure for violations of the Bank Secrecy Act, record-keeping reporting, problems in their anti-money laundering compliance program. And what that underscored, and for those of us who are banking regulatory lawyers with AML compliance experience, what we know from those fingerprints is that, yes, there was probably other things that the Department of Justice was looking at in terms of probably some real money laundering activity that was occurring through that bank. And what we know is our regulators don't like those banks to be in existence, as I said earlier, at the time that an indictment against a bank comes down. So I think my belief is, and I think over time this will come out, is that the bank regulators took the first opportunity they had to make Signature disappear before the Department of Justice got much further into its investigation of the money laundering that would have been going on there.
Carol, I have a question, but there were other banks, I won't be naming those, but you definitely know the names, who were also very friendly to crypto startups in US space before. And I know for sure that these banks, they stopped and taking in more crypto customers, at the end of last year, particularly after everything has happened with FTX. But you mentioned that, these investigations that they have started earlier, much earlier. So having all this, do you expect this to roll on further as a part of this action?
Well, this is all part of the cleanup, and quite honestly, and you know this as well as anyone, Marina, with the business that you've built out in the blockchain analytics area, is that the law enforcement community, the Department of Justice, the IRS, the bank regulators, they all have these tools now that they're working with. And they can see this, and there is I think the reason I don't think crypto is going away, and this may be a closing comment here, is that crypto isn't going away because, in fact, the law enforcement community really likes crypto. They like pursuing cases in crypto. Ultimately, this technology, the underlying, cryptocurrencies are, just sort of the tip of the iceberg in what we see. But the technology itself is a fundamental game changer in being able to track transactional activity. And that's an incredibly powerful piece. And it's interesting that our Senator Warren has just come out with her anti-crypto army that she's putting together. It's in response to, I think, the actions by the crypto community putting together its crypto army. But I think that's a little bit short-sighted because of the benefits that the technology brings to a lot of the problems that we've been experiencing in our systems now.
What you've picked up on there, I think, Carol, is almost a perfect close. We're a couple of minutes away from closing the show, but really what we're looking to deliver to people in this show is sort of introduce them to a range of experts. Clearly, you're one of those that can help us analyze sort of regulatory effectiveness as well, right, in this very, very difficult area we're in. I mean, in a way, who thought that regulation and enforcement and analytics could be so exciting, right? It's great. It's great to hear all that commentary on all the activities going on, and we haven't even touched anywhere near the traditional financial market. So there's loads of follow-on stuff we can do here. Before we close, Marina, is there anything you've got to ask Carol, or anything final comments?
No, it's just I want to echo part of my conversations during the advocacy day on the Capitol Hill whereas like, senators were asking like us, people representing blockchain industry, like what's the advantage of the blockchain and crypto in general? And I was saying exactly what you just said, Carol, that it's much easier to track money laundering activity on crypto. Crypto is by design not the place where it makes sense for you to just go away with this money. And if you compare the amounts that were tracked and seized by government, as a money related to malicious activity, it's nothing compared to money laundering that was happening in the fiat currency. It's just that we know now these amounts, they are visible, and they're causing a lot of attention of the media, but again, it's non-comparable to what was happening in fiat and is happening in fiat. So yeah, I mean, there are some like also like I see some sentiments about the cash is the worst thing that could happen right now, and that's the tainted money. So yeah, I hope that that this argument will be visible enough to those who are ramping up their anti-crypto army.
Carol, thank you so much for joining our first show of Blockchain Unpacked. Really great session. We'll have to get you back on later in the year and understand whether your predictions have all come true or just some of them, because there were some great ones there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jason, and thank you, Marina. It was a great pleasure to work with both of you today.